Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Estate and Succession Mastery. You're getting to be a whiz at this, Michelle. Welcome.
Thanks. Hello.
Anyway, good to be with you again today. And today we're going to talk about the avoiding the squabbles. You know, I had another name for this, but Facebook wouldn't let me use it. But we call it the squabbles scorecard. We used to call it some sort of a fight, avoid the fight scorecard. But anyway, so that's what we're going to talk about today. And also want to just, while we're here today, there's a website people can go to in regard to registering for a webinar about all that we'll be talking about today and some more. So today we're just going to really just go through the scorecard and talk about that. You'll get a copy of this scorecard when you register for the workshop. But in the workshop, you'll get to listen to me and to Leanne from Murdoch's in Toowoomba, talking about all the different types of trusts, the different types of wills, and I leave that all to her because they're more detailed at the stuff than I am. So there's the website there, rural-workshop.com. So we'll have a look at that later on. But yeah, welcome, Michelle. Just your thoughts on are squabbles a problem in families in regard to getting this stuff sorted?
I think squabbles are almost always a problem in families. So this scorecard is a really good way to make sure you avoid them as much as possible.
Yeah, I know you've gone through all the questions, and we'll go through the 10 questions today. And I know you've got some notes besides some of them. But what I've tried to do is just break up the reasons why people do have disputes and so on. And it always comes back, doesn't it, Michelle, to communication. And I know we used to joke about this over previous sessions and so on, how long it took to mention the word communication in these sessions that we do each fortnight. But communication really is the the sort of root of all evil when it comes to conflict and squabbles and any other types of fights that you might like to have within your family. And it just, sadly, it happens because of a lack of communication and because dad or mum don't tell the kids what the plans are. They don't talk about what the future looks like. And the kids are left there sitting, shaking their head going, well, should I stay here or should I go and get another job or whatever? Your experience in that sort of stuff, Michelle, have you?
Yeah, especially in obviously rural, which is where you're sitting from. So it's definitely important to have communication constantly with your family, not necessarily about when you're dying or about to die, but also through your life, what you're going to do with everything while you're alive. Just constant communication about where people are at, what they want to do, what their future is like. So, yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, and I think silence, what I call silence between the generations is kind of hereditary, because if you go back one generation, before, or two generations before yours, and a generation or so before mine, is that, people back in that sort of vintage, so to speak, were not very good at talking about stuff. They kept everything to themselves. And I've used the expression before that, talking about money was vulgar. If you look at my grandparents and so on, having conversations about, what are we going to do with this? What are you going to get? How are we going to hand this over? And all that sort of stuff was sort of deemed as a vulgar conversation. And that was kind of the way they looked at it. So it's taken a number of decades, I think, for people to be able to have just open and frank conversations in regard to their estate plans, their succession plans, and so on between the generations. But anyway, let's go to the scorecard, which the squabble scorecard. As I say, you'll get this when you register for the workshop. Just go to rural-workshop.com and you'll be able to get a copy of the scorecard and watch the webinar. Question 1, do you want to give any read that out and give any comments on that? Thanks, Michelle.
So it's about knowing all of the questions relevant to your family, which relate to tax and the legal aspects of creating a fair estate plan.
Yep. And so what we do in the scorecard is basically we just ask these 10 questions and make a statement. And it's kind of like, do you know, the first one, as you just said, is, do you know all the questions relevant to your family regarding taxation, legal aspects of making things fair? And one of the reasons we put, so you either answer that yes or no, you either do or you don't. And we find generally that the answer might be, let me think, no,
No.
might be no. But one of the issues in creating a fair estate plan is that you might leave certain assets to one child, and this doesn't just relate to rural properties, but you might leave one asset to one child, and you might leave cash or shares or whatever to someone else. And it could be that there's a huge capital gains tax implication. It could be that there's a hidden tax issue in regard to some of the assets that you might leave, and you might have left them all to one kid, and you think you're being fair to both. One ends up with a huge tax bill, and they have to sell the asset to pay the income tax, and the other person might get things on which there's no tax at that point of view, as they've been handed over in the estate. Any sort of examples come to mind for you straight away, Michelle, with that?
Yeah, so a good example is giving your home to one child and then giving your holiday house to the other. Worth about the same, but home does not have capital gains tax issues, but the holiday house does. And so it's just, it's very unequal, even though you intended it to be equal.
Yeah.
Other possibles are superannuation, if that's going to adult kids, that can have tax issues. Shares, things like that. So I think when you're giving gifts of cash to people, you really need to weigh in who is receiving capital gains tax assets like property, shares, investments, things like that, what their end result will be.
Yeah, and sometimes it can end up being very unfair. It's not necessarily just talking about equality, but I mean, if you were heading for equality and one has to pay a whole lot of tax and one doesn't, and sadly, as I say, it could be that you have to sell the asset that you actually wanted to hand on, the holiday home, and everyone gets excited because, Sally's or Fred's getting the holiday home, and everyone's sort of picturing all the holidays they're going to have, and then the tax bill turns up, and it's like, well, the only way we can deal with this is to sell it. So they're things that can lead to, and then all of a sudden, mum and dad are gone. The one who got the one with the huge tax implications gets very irritated because the sibling ended up happy and high and dry, and they've ended up with something they have to sell to pay tax on. So that's one way to start a fight. In fact, it's easy to find ways to start a fight once mum and dad go. If you don't have the communication, it seems pretty simple. And Michelle, that's what you and I are trying to do, is to avoid the squabble, so to speak. Second question I'll just go through is, you've established wills which include asset protection, which is testamentary trust provisions, to ensure wealth is not forfeited from children's failed marriages, bankruptcy, or premature death. Okay, and we've all got examples of that too, haven't we? Where you you hand something over to one of your children, and if you don't create asset protection around that inheritance that child gets, it could disappear in 5 seconds, couldn't it?
Yep. If bankruptcy, if they already are bankrupt, they can just go without any go at it at all. But certainly, as we all know, unfortunately, separating from your partner, divorce or de facto even, is just so common. You really need to protect that inheritance for your kids. It's just, it's a no-brainer, really. The risk is just too high, unfortunately.
Yeah, I remember Tom telling me once about the story of one of his clients, and the son had just gone bankrupt, and Tom was trying to get the parents in to get the wills changed and so on. And unfortunately, they passed away in the meantime and didn't get the changes that Tom was pushing for done. And all the estate went to the son. There was the only child. All went to the son, and he was going through bankruptcy. So the whatever they call the man who's in charge of bankruptcy, the commissioner or whatever he is, he just said thank you very much and took all the inheritance and put it towards bankruptcy, and the child ended up with nothing. And there's ways to protect against that, and that's, I guess, what we're saying here, isn't it?
Yeah, creating testamentary trusts in your will is a way to protect from all of those problems.
I'm going to say, Michelle, because I have even with family members, I've had family members say to me, "What the hell would you want a testamentary trust for? Why would you bother putting that in your estate?" What do you say to people who, because you can't put one in after you're dead? It's kind of too late. So you don't have to use it. If you don't have it, you don't get the benefit. So why would you not put one in the first place?
Yeah, that's right. It's all about giving them the option. If it's not needed for whatever reason in the end, the estate's too small or for whatever reason, that's fine. But in most cases, I would say the kids would be extremely grateful to you for putting that in your will, because as you say, they can't do it afterwards.
Yep. And even if they don't use it, it's okay. There's no detriment if they don't use it, but if they need it, they're going to be grateful it's there. Do you want to go through the third one? Thanks, Michelle.
Sure. You know exactly how to start your my writing is terrible. Your pre-death estate and succession planning.
Okay, and who you need to involve to ensure your best result. So another issue that people struggle with is knowing where to start, who to talk to, and how much it's going to cost, and all those sorts of things, isn't it?
Yeah. And you might just think, I'll just go to the local lawyer down the road. But most times, there is a lot more hands needed in the pot.
Oh, that's right. Or I'll go to the news agency and I'll buy one of those cheap $35 wills. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's always going to end well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and I guess that's what can cause issues within families, isn't it? Is mum and dad not having a think through in regard to who they need to help them to get this done, and how they're going to make sure they get the best result. I mean, people we're talking to, I mean, even not rural people, even just someone who's working in the public service or working in a salaried position these days. People have large superannuation levels of life insurance or whatever, and so $500,000 by the time then you add on a house, it's very easy to get people up to $1 million, isn't it? It's somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million before you even think about wealth generation for people as they're going further through life. And it's a lot of money, and if you don't look after it properly, it's a lot of money to go out the back door. So and that's, once again, that's when the fights start. When it hasn't been set up properly, when people haven't thought it through, and the kids are sitting there afterwards, they're grieving their parents, and they're also sitting there going, what the heck, why didn't they do this? And then they look over at their brother who's ended up with twice as much as they have, and all because mum and dad didn't take the time to sit down and have a think about things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is just so many people who come to see me is because they've been through this with their own family. Mum died last year, and it was such a mess that I've decided to come and do my estate plan now. So it would be good if it was before they had the disaster, but so it's really important.
Well, you raise a good point. I mean, at one stage I was looking at the number of people that had come in and worked with us over the last few years, and most of them, Michelle, were coming because the parents had screwed up the relationship between them and their siblings. And that's an unfair thing to say, but you actually, if you don't take this seriously and you don't do proper planning, you actually do screw up. In one of the videos I think I sent you about, what value of your estate does it cost to get this fixed up? It's just a minute proportion of your estate, but if you don't get it fixed up, not you guys, but all those other scummy lawyers who run around chasing ambulances, they rub their hands together and say, whoa, we're glad you didn't take any time or effort to do your estate planning. So now one of the kids has contested the will, and so off we go to the races. And the saddest part is that once that happens, and I've just seen it, you just need one of the siblings to start the squabble, to start the fight, to take action, to contest the will, and all of a sudden it just turns to mustard for everybody. And unfortunately.
Yep.
Anyway, we're halfway through, but we're only a third of the way through the questions, so I'll stop chatting so much. Okay, number 4, you've ensured open and regular communication with your spouse and children, and you regularly discuss the estate and succession planning topic. I don't think I've ever seen anyone tick yes to that. Out of all the ones we've had done, that's just usually a no-brainer for a no. It's not dinner table conversation.
No, that's what I was going to say. I think it's really difficult for people to start that conversation because it's talking about when they're going to die. And that can be confronting for the person who is closer to the end of their life and upsetting for the children. So nobody really wants to sit around and have a chat about what happens when dad or mum die. But it's just really important to talk about it. Unfortunately, it's reality for all of us.
Yeah, and it's interesting to say nobody wants to sit around and talk about it. And in one sense, from the way we've been brought up, is to not have an expectation, to not have an entitled attitude, and so on. And that's what I think you were getting at there. Is nobody wants to act in an entitled way and say, "Well, what am I getting?" But people do want to know what their future looks like. In other words, do they come home and help dad on the property? Do they come home and help dad and mum in the business, or do they go and make their own life? And I think that's what most are looking for. It's not about, most kids are not looking for the money. They're looking for, what are our, what should we be focusing on? Are we going to come home, dad, and help you? Or do you think it's more prudent that we go on and do our own stuff? So if you can have conversations, I mean, you don't have, I never encourage people to sit down there and say, well, you're going to get $745,000 and you're going to get 836. You never talk about money or the numbers, but you talk to your kids just in regard to, what do you think the options are? Do you want to come back to the business? Do you want to come back to the property? Or do you want to go to university and learn to be an accountant or a solicitor?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
That's number 4. So have you got 5 scribbled out, or do you know what that says?
You know how to create fairness between your children, and this has been communicated with them.
Yeah, and that's when you talk about squabbles, this is one that certainly will instigate squabbles if someone feels they've been treated more fairly than someone else. In other words, have you created? You don't have to create equality between your children. And then sometimes you might have given them a leg up with their first home. You might have helped them with their business. You might have helped them through university or college or something like that. And so, it's like they've got part of the pot already. So what do you need to do to create fairness for the children that you haven't helped? But the question really just is about, do the kids understand why you're doing things in a certain way? And have you communicated that? And if I can just say too, that's one of the things we do with our legacy letters, or our, what we call the Dear Mary letters or the legacy letters, is always being in a position, if you can, where you've written notes, just in case something takes you before you've had this conversation with your kids. Make sure the kids understand why you've done things in a certain way and what your logic was behind it. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 6, we're firing.
Do you know your kids' plans for the future? You're going to have to read it.
Okay, you've been writing over this, haven't you? And not experiencing any communication issues with them or their spouses. I have this thing called the exponential grief curve, Michelle, but I'll let you attack this one first if you want. It's really talking about, what your kids' plans for the future are, and there's no communication issues already with them and their spouse. How many people can answer yes to that?
Yeah, probably not many. So, and probably because the kids don't know what they're doing either. But at least I think if you communicate with them, they might have a general idea. So, yes, I'm having a family now, or I've gone to uni now, but I definitely want to come back to the farm and work on it in 10 years' time. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Or, no, I just don't think I'll ever come back. I'm going to raise my kids at the beach. So having those discussions ongoing and openly And then you've got people in the mix. You've got spouses who sometimes they can bring up other communication problems. So then that can cause issues with that whole family unit as well. So need to really work through those so you can talk with all of them as a group and individually.
Yeah, we have this thing. I don't know if I've been through it with you, Michelle. It's called the exponential grief curve, and by exponential meaning the longer it goes, the faster it goes up. And I think that happens. Exponential grief happens when you haven't had conversations with your kids, and the longer you leave it, the worse it gets, faster, so to speak. And that's especially true when the kids start to get married. So, if you're not having the conversation with your kids and you're not saying, hey, do you want to come home or don't you want to come home to help on the farm? If you're not having those conversations, you can get away with it for a while the kids are young and they probably don't know what they want to do. There's no one else in their life and they're just sitting there trusting mum and dad. So they're not worried about, whether or not you're talking to them about it. They figure it'll all be okay. But the moment, your children get into a relationship or get married and start having their own families, then the longer you leave it without having these good conversations with them, it really starts to wind up in regard to the fact that, if it's a son that's the child, the daughter-in-law is going to be sitting there saying, well, it's all very well for you to trust everyone, but, if something happens to you, where does that leave me? And that's a fairly natural worry for a daughter-in-law specifically to have, because if she dies, the son's still going to be looked after by mum and dad, but because she's the outsider in the family, and this works the other way around for sons-in-law as well, but if the daughter-in-law will be sitting there thinking, if my fiance, husband, or boyfriend, whatever, dies, I'm sitting here on this property. I've got no security. I've got no ownership. I've got no idea, and I don't know what the future looks like. So you need to have, and that's where then that person will start getting into the ribs of the child and saying, you need to have a conversation with your parents. I need to have some certainty, and I've just seen so many times where that has led to real issues within the family. Talk about starting squabbles, starting World War III. Where the son or daughter-in-law starts to demand and starts to feel very entitled to the parents about what they think they should be doing, and that really can open up some wounds. I've got battle scars from them already. Okay. Seeing you haven't got your glasses on, I'll read the next few. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Not that you have glasses. Okay. You have had facilitated conversations, this is number 7, including with your spouse and with your kids, to ensure there is a thorough understanding of your plans. Can you tick yes or no to that? You've had a facilitated conversation. Now, I always say to people, you can't fix this from within the family. In other words, when people say to me, I'm going to sit down and have a family meeting and we're all going to, sing Kumbaya and chant and all that sort of stuff and we'll all live happily ever after, I just shake my head and say, it's never going to happen. You can't fix it within the family. You do need someone else to come in and start the conversation, to have the conversation, and to be the independent person in the room. Because otherwise, some children will sit there and not say anything because they don't want to offend mum and dad. Most children will sit there and out of not wanting to seem entitled or having an expectation. And yet, these days, some of the kids sit there and say exactly what they want. So there might be one or two kids, express all their thoughts, and the other two kids sit quietly in the corner, and that's just going to lead to grief, because the quiet ones are always the ones that walk away and say, bugger, bugger, bugger. Nobody listens to me. I'm never heard. Nobody cares, and I've got the irrits with all my family members. So you really need to have someone else come in and start the conversation. Michelle, you would have had it, even in just people in normal businesses coming in and getting their estate planning done. You can see, can't you, that if the kids aren't listened to, it's always going to create problems. Is that fair?
Yeah, very fair. And there's always all of those different sides to the story. Mum's got one view, dad's got another, kid has another view, and they're all completely different. So, and nobody's right or wrong necessarily, but definitely having so having that independent facilitator come in to help those conversations is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. We better keep moving along. Dragging the chain here. Okay. The risk of contested wills. The question is, you have attained consensus between all parties, within reason, to ensure the risk of contested wills is negated. Now, in all the planning we do, but that's a regular question, people ask, because most wills aren't necessarily equal. They're fair, not necessarily equal. But people often ask, or we try and put their minds at rest in regard to, is there a risk of a will being contested? And that's the reason I try and talk to all the kids individually, rather than, I don't do the family meeting, sitting around a table stuff. So we have a conversation with each of the kids, and it helps me to gauge whether I think there's a risk of a child, feeling a little bitter and twisted about what their future entitlement might look like, and are they therefore going to contest the will? Now, the red, is it the red herring? No, anyway, there's another word I can't think of, but where it really comes and bites people in the backside is it might be the son or daughter-in-law that is the one that encourages the child to contest the will. It's not necessarily going to be your children that will instigate the contesting of the will, although technically they have to do it, but they may become under immense pressure from their spouses. So the people from outside the family might be sitting there going, what your parents did wasn't fair. You're better than your brother. You're better than your sister. You should have got this. You should have got that. So we need to be looking out at the marital choices of children as well to check to see whether or not they're going to be likely to contest wills. Because what's your experience in this? Have you seen it a few times? I'm sure.
Yeah, it's often pushed by the spouse of the child. The child sits there and goes, "Oh well, that's fine. I'm not happy about it, but that's what they wanted, or that's what they did. No worries." And then the spouse comes along and says, "Nope, I'm putting my foot down. You've got to make a claim now because that's not fair.
If you don't make a claim, I'm leaving you." And blackmail really does occur in cases like this, because sometimes it can be a lot of money, and the child's spouse might be thinking, this is our future, we'd better look after it now. Number 9, we're flying through these, Michelle. Number 9, a fully documented and funded plan which creates absolute lifetime certainty for your spouse, as well as financial security where required. And this is one of the key things I always say to people, that my first priority is always to mum and dad. And whilst we often talk about them both going and what would happen with the kids and so on, I mean, 98% of the time, one of them will die before the other. And have you guaranteed financial security for your spouse? Is that person going to be okay for the rest of their life? Or have you gone too far into working out how you're going to transition the farm over to the, one of the kids or two of the kids or something like that? Have you forgotten to make sure that your wife, for example, is still going to be okay for the rest of her life? Have you really documented that? And is there absolute certainty for your spouse? Is that something that people talk about a lot with you, Michelle?
No, they don't actually talk about it in that sort of, it is often we talk about mum and dad dying at the same time, which is not usually the case. But we still think about what's going to happen if only one passes away. Definitely you need to factor in things like, if two spouses working on a farm together, are they both working on it together? Can the wife, for example, continue to run the farm if you die? If husband dies. So, and sometimes they can't because they're not equipped. They're used to being a homemaker, supporting the children, not out working on the farm. So there are things to consider as well. What are they going to do if you pass away?
Yeah, and have you provided for that? Have you put in place an income stream, a guaranteed income stream for your spouse? And I'd always suggest, I always look at that before you look at passing on the property to the next generation. I mean, it's all very well if you're going to do that, but have you created, that silo of wealth that we often talk about to make sure mum's going to be okay if something happens to dad, for example. And it can happen the other way around too. Sometimes the wives can pass away and the men don't know what to do with themselves. So
that's true. Very true.
They need looking after. Okay, the final question is, have you put in place the necessary protections, and have you got a process to guarantee your dreams and wishes are followed for the benefit of your family? I'm just going to say that often people say, what's the first and most important thing you talk to clients about? And Michelle, you would have heard me say this before. I always like to start with the heart. In other words, what's in their heart for their family. So forget about their assets, their liabilities, what they own, what they owe, and all those sorts of things. To me, it's important to understand what someone's heart's telling them in regard to their spouse, in regard to their children, and what are the things that are most important when they're gone. So what do you need to help them with to make sure that their dreams and aspirations come true even when they're not around? Have they thought about this, and have they got that in place? So as a 10th question, that's pretty much a certain no as well for most people.
Yeah.
Any more thoughts in regard to those?
No more thoughts. I think you've covered it all.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's good.
I actually put down number 11 too, and in regard to squabbles. And one of the byproducts of where there is conflict in the family is, and we have talked about this before, is, have you thought about introducing a counsellor into the family mix? Mental health issues, emotional resilience, all these sorts of things are just becoming more and more current these days. And, there might be someone in the family that's suffering in some way at the moment in regard to anxiety or mental health issues, mental resilience issues, and so on. And I'm going to ask this question number 11, which isn't on here. Have you thought about helping people in your family in regard to maybe resolving some of these things that are causing conflict? Because sometimes conflict can grow from issues that could be an illness of some sort. So, okay. But look, just in regard to the scorecard itself, and if you want to watch the webinar, which doesn't talk as specifically about these questions as we have today, rural-workshop.com. And Michelle, I'm going to put you on the spot again as I do, but just a bit of a summary about the value of going through a scorecard with people. Any thoughts you'd like to make?
Yes, I think what I noticed the most is that you use the word exactly a lot. And I think that's because people say, oh yeah, we talked about that with our family. We know what they want, but you really do need to know exactly what everybody wants, where everyone's at, really communicate. So you're really clear. Everyone's clear on what's happening, what's going to happen. So I think it's a really good way to point out to most people they probably don't have everything as tied up as it needs to be.
Absolutely right, and thank you for that summary. And I'm going to have to read through and see how many times I wrote exactly down here, but maybe I just say it all the time. I don't know.
No, it's a good thing.
No, and you're absolutely right. Scorecards to me are a great way of measuring. I find in life you can never make progress in anything in life if you don't measure it. If you want something to get better, you have to take measurements. Obviously. So, but anyway, thank you for your time today, Michelle. Sorry about the noise in the background, and look forward to catching up with everyone next fortnight. See you then.